with skirmishes still happening on the country's fringes, Ukrainian voters will go to the polls this weekend. It's a year since protesters filled Independence Square, and since then, thousands of people have been killed. Today, Vladimir Putin blamed the West for pushing Ukraine into war and chaos. But many, like Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster who once tried to contest the Russian presidency, believe it is Putin who's hell-bent on redrawing the Russian map. I met him earlier this week. Mr. Kasparov, there are many challenges affecting Russia today. Let's start with Ukraine. What do you think is happening there now?
It's very clear that Vladimir Putin's intention, it's a top item in his agenda, was and still is to destroy independent Ukrainian state. It seems to me that Putin's own survival, his claim to power, and naturally he wants to stay in power for the rest of his life, requires this new image of Vladimir the Great, the collector of Russian lands.
Do you think he will try to grab other parts of territory?
Deeper in Ukrainian territory, more body bags would be returned to Russia. And it seems to me that he was, and he probably is now, quite hesitant about the cost of this operation. I would probably say that now he'll try to use the harsh weather conditions in winter, trying to freeze Ukraine. He'll definitely use provocations to destabilize the situation. He'll see whether he could put some financial pressure on the Ukrainian government.
You see him as a dictator, very clearly.
But, tell me how else you can call the man who is in power 15 years and who made it very clear that he would stay in power for the rest of his life.
How do you think the rest of the world has reacted to him? Partly in Ukraine, but in terms of what you see as this new phrase, him trying to create himself as Vladimir the Great?
A lot of people are just it's resenting the comparison between Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler. But I think this comparison is fair if we remember that Hitler in 1935, 1936, 1937, 1938 has been treated quite differently than the Hitler from the history books. We're talking about dictator growing to a monster because he was not confronted at early stage.
Is the West guilty of appeasement then?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are seeing it's the same algorithm, and let's not forget. Unlike Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Putin has a nuclear weapon. So we're dealing with a man who could get desperate because staying in power is a matter of survival for him. Because Putin is quite a savvy poker player, geopolitical poker. Some people call it chess, but it's not chess, because all he does, and he has been doing it for a long time, he's good in bluffing. Every time, whether it was a Syrian crisis or Crimea or Eastern Ukraine, he could see that the West was not ready to call the bluff. And every day, we could see that the price goes up.
The West, however, is trying to deal with lots of very complicated foreign policy issues right now, including trying to deal with so-called Islamic State.
Yeah, but the Islamic State problem has military solution. It's all about the amount of air power or military power or material power you can send to Iraq. The problem is that Vladimir Putin case has no military or economic solution.
You're suggesting that Putin is potentially a bigger threat than so-called Islamic State?
By far.
By far?
By far, of course. Islamic State is a regional threat. Russia is still a nuclear superpower with, by the way, a lot of money.
What are your strategies and tactics then for helping to remove him?
In this case, there's not much you can do in the country. I mean, most of
There's not much you can do?
Actually, there's nothing you can do in the country. It's just, it's eventually you have to wait until, that the tide, can change, because all people I know, they're either abroad or behind the bars.
How does it end, though? I mean, you've said we should forget about elections.
Yes.
And you've warned that it won't end in a lawful way. You even warned this might end up with the collapse of the country.
Yes, it will end with the collapse of the country. But again, what do you expect? Is when dictator stays in power for too long, and he has been busy with cleaning the political landscape. The longer he stays in power, fewer the chances that the transition would be peaceful.
So How to stop it, though?
You have to oppose him aggressively. You have to make it very clear that there will be a cost for Russia, for Russian elite, for Putin's actions in Ukraine, and that will include, of course, much tougher sanctions. And I think there's open military support for Ukraine. When I say military support, there are plenty of things that can be done without sending troops.
Finally, as a Russian, as somebody who has spent so long trying to battle with him, how do you feel about where things are now? How do you feel about the situation?
Our problem is we don't know when and how things will happen in Russia. What we know that Vladimir Putin will die in Kremlin. Whether it's a natural cause or not, that's another question. But he's not going to leave the Kremlin. I think what is important now is to have a plan for action for the day when things collapse in Russia. And it's very important that the rest of the world will put its power and authority to prevent Russia to become a monstrous state.
Okay, Kasparov, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We asked the Russian embassy for a response tonight, but none was forthcoming. Yet whether it's trying to persuade Putin to play nice or confronting the chaos in Iraq, is there a sense today that Western democracies are nearly impotent, bewildered even, in the face of what they confront? Instead of democracy conquering the world, is its influence actually diminished?